Welcome to the Real News Network and welcome on Facebook Live. This is live on Facebook right now. I want to make sure that this is coming through loud and clear. So if you're watching right now, please let me know and give us a comment on Facebook that you can hear this loud and clear. I'm waiting. Okay, here we go. All right, so if you can hear me, send me a message, make a comment. Okay, you guys can hear me, thanks. All right, so it's official. Portland has become the first city to tackle the nation's skyrocketing inequality by taxing exorbitant CEO pay. A portion of the Dodd-Frank law will force corporations to report CEO to employee pay ratios to the SEC starting next year. And using that information, Portland will tax companies who do business with the city and pay their executives 100 times more than their workers. Well, now joining us to discuss this is Steve Novick. He's a Portland City Commissioner. Thanks so much for joining us, Steve.
Thanks so much for having me.
So you were a key force behind this bill. Explain exactly how this works.
The way this works is there's about 540 publicly traded companies that do enough business in Portland that they pay our tax on business profits. So when the SEC information comes out next year, our Revenue Bureau will look at the list of companies the publicly traded companies that do business in Portland and pay our tax, and they'll look at the SEC disclosures. And if a company pays its CEO more than 100 times what it pays the typical worker, then they'll pay a 10% surcharge on the business income tax they would ordinarily pay. So like if they were paying $1,000, they pay $1,100.
Okay.
If they pay their CEO more than 250 times what they pay the typical employee, then if they pay $1,000, they pay a 25% surcharge, they pay $1,250.
And so to remind our viewers, we are live on Facebook, so please send us your questions. And so with any type of measure that's sort of tackling inequality and taxing business, for example, raise the minimum wage as well, you're going to have your detractors. Now, opponents of raise the minimum wage will say, hey, the companies are just going to move out of town. Can that happen in this case? And how do you respond to those arguments?
Well, it would be very silly for companies to move operations out of town because what we have, again, is a tax on on profits, and this would make our tax on their profits slightly higher. If Wells Fargo is making money having branches in Portland, then it would make no sense for them to shut down their branches because the tax on their profits goes up a little bit. If Walmart is making money off a store in Portland, it would make no sense for them to shut down the store because the tax on their profits goes up a little bit.
And now I was reading Fortune, which of course is sort of critical of this, and they quoted Sarah McDonough, who's the president and CEO of the Portland Business Alliance, which is the city's Chamber of Chamber. She said the tax will have virtually no impact on addressing income inequality. She said, quote, "This tax is yet another signal that Portland is hard on businesses that want to invest here." She said, "I really think this was more of a media stunt than a real, sincere effort to address income inequality." Some pretty strong words. How do you respond to that?
You're fading in and out.
Okay, so sorry for that. I'm hoping our connection will hold up, but so essentially the president of Portland's Chamber of Commerce.
Faded out again.
So let's try this again. So I
can respond to what Sandy said.
Okay, go ahead.
I can respond to that.
Go ahead.
So if only Portland took this measure, then it wouldn't make much difference. But we're getting a lot of national and international publicity, and I think a lot of other jurisdictions will adopt this kind of tax surcharge on companies with outrageous CEO pay. And if enough jurisdictions do that, then corporate America is going to have to take notice, and the shareholders of America will realize that they've got fewer after-tax profits to divvy up because they have such an outrageous ratio of CEO pay to typical worker pay. So I do think that once it's followed by their jurisdictions, this will make corporate America take notice. And I will note that several internationally known economists who study inequality, like Thomas Piketty and Emmanuel Saez and Branko Milanovic, have all spoken favorably about this proposal. They think it can make a difference.
And it's expected to raise around $3 million a year. What is that money going to go towards?
It'll go to the city's general fund, which pays for police, fire, parks, and housing. We made a commitment this year that in the coming years, we're going to spend more on homeless services than we did this year. So this will help us meet that commitment to spending a bit more on homeless services.
And of course, President-elect Donald Trump has a growing number of ex-Goldman Sachs bankers. I think it's 3 now that are going to be in his cabinet or high positions in his administration. He has former hedge funders, billionaires. So you're not going to see these kind of policies on a national level the next 4 or maybe 8 years. Talk about why this sort of initiative is important for this to happen on a local level.
Well, again, there's enough states and cities and counties out there that even if the federal government doesn't do something similar, we could have an impact. It's also interesting, that Donald Trump has personally denounced outrageous CEO pay. And Theresa May, the new British prime minister, the conservative prime minister, has called for something like the SEC rule requiring disclosure of CEO pay ratios to typical worker pay. I know that the Republicans are planning to take a run at getting rid of Dodd-Frank altogether, but Chuck Schumer has said that he thinks he's got the votes to keep it. And this would be a particularly hard provision of Dodd-Frank to overturn, I think, because some of the rules in Dodd-Frank are kind of arcane things about banking. The idea that corporations have to say how much more their CEOs make their typical worker is something that's easy to grasp. And I think that Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders would beat the hell out of the Republicans and Trump if they tried to get rid of that provision.
All right, Steve Novick, thanks so much for joining us. We're having some problems with the connection, so hopefully we can have you on again for a more extended interview and more viewer questions. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us at the Real News Network.